Joe, who came to Copenhagen for the UN Climate Summit. I'm Amy Goodman with Anjali Kamat as we continue with the voices inside and outside of the Bella Center, where this convention summit is taking place, of well over 15,000 people. In fact, including the journalists, it's over 20,000, Anjali.
Well, the UN summit here in Copenhagen saw one of its first protests Tuesday when members of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance marched inside the conference center, citing the scientific evidence that the planet's average temperature could rise by more than 2 degrees Celsius. The protesters chanted, "2 degrees is suicide."
Actually, it is one of the disappointments, and we have been following very keenly, and we have realized that particularly the Danish Prime Minister is determined to deliver a politically binding deal, which, of course, you know, there is no deal there. It is just something, a decoration of a failure. So we are determined to ensure that if they don't deliver a fair deal, and that is a legally binding deal, under the pillars of what we have been negotiating, then we want to urge the African group, the G77, and even the heads of states and the ministers will be coming, that it is dangerous. They should not sign a genocide paper for us.
The developed countries that do not want to sign reasonable commitments under these negotiations. So we are not saying we want to walk out. We will not want our negotiators to walk out. But please don't force them to do so, because Africa is too hot for us, and we don't want people to continue to take advantage of us.
Augustine Yamshi from Cameroon, voices from inside the Bella Center. Well, we go now to the chief climate negotiators from both Bolivia and Paraguay. Bolivia has been one of the countries leading the call for just climate reparations here at the COP15 talks. President Evo Morales, who was just re-elected in a landslide victory, has been outspoken on the issue of climate debt. He told Mother Jones magazine last November, quote, "If there are countries that are doing a lot of damage to the environment, those countries should make some acknowledgement, some reparation for the damages that they are causing." Soon after, he released a sweeping 20-point plan, including a demand that developed countries contribute a minimum of 1% of their annual GDP to a United Nations fund for poor countries. We're joined now by Angelica Navarro, the chief climate negotiator for Bolivia, and we're also joined by Miguel Lovera, the chief negotiator for Paraguay. He's played a key role in negotiations over the world's rainforests that many expect will be one of the few deals to be actually finalized at the summit here in Copenhagen. It's called REDD, or Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Degradation, and a final text is expected as early as this weekend. Angelica Navarro and Miguel Lovera, welcome both of you to Democracy Now! Angelica, maybe we can start with you. Talk about the Danish text and your reaction.
Well, I have to say that everybody was taken a little bit by surprise, but I also want to congratulate the very good work that the press has been doing, because we have learned it from the press, actually. And the reaction has been quite straightforward from the G77, and in two accounts, on process and on the content. And on the process, I have to say that we are quite surprised, because this is not what we were expecting. 192 countries are united here to try to come to a deal. And there is this parallel process that basically seems to be untransparent, undemocratic, non-participatory, top-down, that it seems to be imposing itself on what we are trying to achieve with 192 countries. We think that we have to come back to the real track, and that is a track with participation, inclusiveness, and democracy. That is for the process. But in the content, we have serious also concerns on the content. It seems that we are talking about just one agreement, disregarding the two tracks, two mandates, and two results that we are trying to achieve here in Copenhagen. I want to remind everybody that G77 and Bolivia, African Group, and other groups have been calling very strongly to have the Kyoto Protocol survive. That is, that developed countries should should come with their second commitment period, ambitious numbers for the reductions of emissions. That is one of the results we want from here. The second result that we want is, of course, an enhanced implementation of the convention through the LCA process. What the Danish text seems to be do is a merge of the two, which impose new obligations to developing countries. So we are the ones that are supposed now to be mitigating, and I'm asking, what will a developing country, rural men or women, indigenous women in Bolivia doesn't even have electricity, will mitigate? And for what? So that developed countries can even have still 2-3 cars? Or just like 4 times change their clothes in a year? What are they asking? Do they want us to finance the problems they are causing? Why should I pay for them? But on top of that, why should we choose between building a school, a bridge, or a hospital and adapt? So that is what we think. And on top of that, we think that the level of ambition that what is proposed in the Danish leaked text is definitely not enough. It will not solve the problem. It will not solve the climate change.
Angelica Navarro, you took the stage by storm, to use a climate metaphor, in June in Bonn, Germany, when you talked about this issue of climate debt. Explain what you mean by it.
I just want to remind that actually historical responsibility is already in the convention, and we were, if I'm not mistaken, 5 countries that presented in Bonn in technical briefing historical responsibility quantification of what developed countries have done and what they should do as a result. That was India, Brazil, China, and Bolivia. The Bolivian proposal in specific is climate debt. What do I mean, and what does Bolivia mean by that? Is basically that developed countries have over-consumed the common atmospheric space. 20% of the population have actually emitted more than 2/3 of the emissions, and as a result they have caused more than 90% of the increase in temperatures. As a result, developing countries, we are suffering. Bolivia's glaciers are melting between 40 to 55%. We have extended droughts. We are having the lowlands more flooding, and we are losing between 4 to 17% of our GDP in the worst years. That is climate debt. And what we are asking is repayment. We are not asking for aid. We are not begging for aid. We want developed countries to comply with their obligation and pay their debt. How are they going to pay it? The first part is to pay it through reduction emission domestically. They have really to fulfill their obligations. This is not money. This is not the part of monetary. They just have to comply with their obligations ambitiously for the first and second commitment period. And the second part of the climate debt is the adaptation debt. Everything that we are already suffering as Bolivia, as indigenous people in Africa and in other parts, that we can accept, that is finance and transfer of technology, but not the peanuts that we are seeing on the table right now. That is not even a fraction of what they have used to save their bank. But apparently, finance and banks are more important than people and life. And that is very sad, but it's like that. Because we think that they are negotiating not an environmental agreement, they seem to be negotiating an economic agreement.
Evo Morales, your president, is calling for a 49% cut in greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes, actually, we have several numbers. We are asking for the 49%, and I'm happy to be with Paraguay because we are co-sponsoring the same actually submission. This 49% has to be in 2017. But even like that, developed countries will not be able to repay their debt. They have to pay more. We know they cannot do that, but the amount is so important that actually developed countries should do negative cuts. How are they going to do that? We have to think about it. When the 49% is just a fraction of what they are doing. Meaning that they have to reduce everything to zero, but on top of that, they have to liberate atmospheric space they have occupied unrightfully for developing countries to develop. What they cannot pay in emission cuts, they can pay a little bit on finance and transfer of technology. We can think on that. And of course, we have to go real on the numbers. It's not only the cuts, but it's also the degrees that we want to talk about. We are talking less